Good morning. How are y'all doing today? Good. You can hear me a little bit better this week compared to last week because my mic isn't on mute. So I apologize for any angry thoughts that may have entered my head. Y'all wouldn't have heard them, but it was my fault. That's it. I realize that there's no children's church today. I promise this isn't persecution against you. My children are here too. But in Matthew 5:10 through 12, Jesus finishes the Beatitudes. This is the first part of his Sermon on the Mount. And it almost just kind of wraps up the whole Christian life in these just 11 verses. But in verses 10 through 12, he says, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Jesus begins and ends the Beatitudes with a promise. He says, blessed are, in the first one he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And the end saying, blessed are the persecuted, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I'm thinking inheriting the kingdom of heaven is a big deal. But he wraps up the Beatitudes on both sides. He bookends it with the kingdom that is coming. We read these verses about persecution, and we read others like them. We read about what Paul went through. We read about what the Christians went through, how they were stoned and murdered, how they were fed to the lions, how they were sawn in two, how they were forced to basically live in caves and hiding. We read about the persecuted church in Revelation, and throughout the whole thing, we see this happening. But I have to wonder if we as Christians living today really expect persecution. Because I would wager that we honestly don't. We live in America where we have massive amounts of freedoms that Christians in other countries do not have. But Jesus still says a servant is not above his master. If they persecuted me, you shouldn't expect any different. And the reason for that is Jesus did not call us to live a life that was compatible with the world around us. And so if it comes, perhaps when it comes, because we'll be getting to that when it comes later, are we going to fight back? Are we going to rail against it? Or are we going to follow what Christ says? Because our culture says that we should fight back, that we should go to war, that we have our rights. Right? And if you try to put down my rights, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to libel you, I'm going to slander you, I will drag your name through the mud. Because I have my rights and you can't stop me. That's the attitude of our culture. But I don't see this as an option for us. As if you remember last week, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God." Now, I want to make something clear here. We're not talking about defending another. We're not talking about letting evil just run rampant. If I see an old lady getting hurt by someone, I'm not going to say, "Oh, well, I'm a Christian, I can't have anything to do with that." If I see someone being persecuted or hurt or having evil thrust upon them, I'm not going to, we don't stand back and allow the weak to be abused. You can look from Genesis to Revelation, God does not allow the strong to ignore the weak who are being abused. That's not an option. But if it's going to come to me suffering for the cause of Christ, not someone just being mean. Okay, it says, what does Jesus say? Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Not just someone being mean to you. And the blessing comes when we are persecuted for the sake of Christ. And so if I'm going to be persecuted, to be exiled, to be reviled for the cause of Christ, so be it. And that's hard for me to say because I like to fight back. But Jesus says something very similar in Luke chapter 6. In Luke chapter 6, we have, it's almost like a mini Beatitudes. It doesn't have all of them, but it does have several. And the whole thing is almost like a miniature Sermon on the Mount. But Jesus says in verse 22, "Blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and cast out your name as evil, for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for indeed your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner their fathers did to the prophets." Blessed are you when you're hated, excluded, reviled, spurned as evil, not when you're actually evil and you deserve to be spurned, but as evil, even though you're not. Not just because, as you said earlier, not just because people are mean, but because they're rejecting Christ inside you. And you think, well, why would they do that? If my life looks like Christ, well, isn't that a good thing? Yes, it is. But not to the world. Rejoice when people reject you for my sake. Why? Why rejoice? Because your light is so great and your salt is so salty that people actually noticed Christ in your life. I mean, I can go all day, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm going to go and do my thing, but you know what? No one else needs to know that. It's not how it works. We're called to be salt and light to a world in darkness, to a world that is rotting. In a Christian's presence, a person who follows Christ, their presence is so toxic to the view of the world that the world will automatically reject and cast them out. The presence of a Christian, the presence of a Christ follower is toxic to a world that hates him. Now this kind of goes against our culture because several decades prior to now, most people were Christians and went to church and did these things. It was normal. The tides are changing. And while we who follow recognize Christ as love and kind and gentle, while we recognize Christ as saving, the world does not. Because what the world wants is, buddy Jesus. He's your buddy. Thumbs up. But Christ is offensive to the world. Christ is offensive to a world that does not want the truth. The world wants to say, it doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you try hard, you'll be fine. It doesn't matter what you do, as long as you follow your heart, you'll be great. It doesn't matter who you love or what you do or who you step on, as long as you do what you want, things are going to be okay. And Christ says, no, it's not. Because Christ says, I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. That is offensive. And Christianity is offensive. I don't mean offensive in the way that it's usually used today. Because I look at you the wrong way. Oh, that's offensive. Christianity is offensive at its core, to the world at its core. Because in large part, we stand for what the world is against, and we stand against what the world is for. But as Christians, we are to do it peacefully and quietly and kindly to follow God's will. Remember last week, we don't rail against people. We follow. And Jesus says, if we go down to verse 27, he says how to follow. And he says, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. So our response to our enemies. Our response is to love, to do good, to bless, to take the insult, to give when stolen from, to give when asked, to lend without asking back. This is hard stuff. This is not normal stuff. At least not to the world. Now, I was doing some reading on these verses because I've always had a difficult time with these verses. So I was reading a very popular mainstream commentary. I use it for a lot of stuff. But when I was reading it for this, it said, well, this is picturesque language used at the time to show an ideal. Only a madman or a fanatic would actually take this literally word for word. I suppose I'm a fringe fanatic. Because it doesn't read like picturesque, idealistic language. It reads a whole lot like a command. And it comes after a lot of commands. And it's followed by a lot of commands, so I'm pretty sure the plainest explanation is the right one. But this is hard to do in a world that says you must fight back. Because if you don't fight back, it's just going to get worse. If you don't fight back, Christianity is going to suffer. If you don't fight back, you're going to lose your rights. I seem to recall that Christianity is still around after the Roman Empire fell. I recall that Christianity is still around after the Spanish Inquisition. I recall that Christianity survived through several enormous world-changing events that threatened to wipe it out of existence. It's still here. The way of the Lord does not die. And we are called to follow that regardless of what it means and regardless of what it costs. And it's not for us to stand and scream and retaliate, because that's what the world does. But instead, we live the faith without ceasing, without apology, and without fear. Because that is what will attract those who desire God. And it will infuriate a world railing against it. I saw a video just a couple weeks ago, and it just went viral. And it was titled, "I'm a Christian, but I'm not, ... And it was, a bunch of people, my age or younger, very slickly produced, very well put together. Said, "Well, I'm a Christian, but I'm not," and then they would kind of fill in the blank. Things like, "But I'm not crazy. I'm not one of those fringe people." And the whole thing was it felt like an apology for Christianity. "Oh, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm not like those weirdos over there." What I didn't hear one time was the name of Jesus. When asked what Christianity was about, nothing about Jesus. It's about love and caring, and it's about being nice and doing good things to your neighbor. That's what it's about. No, it's not. It's about Jesus. Just like everything else in this entire universe. Do you remember Chick-fil-A several years ago? There was a thread of this big, huge boycott because Chick-fil-A had given to some organization that was pushing for traditional marriage, and so people got all upset, and they were going to boycott it and all these other things. It made the news. It was on the news for several nights. I don't recall one time Chick-fil-A going out and saying, "You know what, we're gonna sue, we're gonna fight back, we're gonna do all these things, we're gonna make sure that they don't mess us up." I don't ever remember hearing that. What I do remember hearing is that they had their biggest sales of all time during that period. We're not the ones that fight the battle or the war. We fight little battles here and there. But it's God who wins the war. We, in all circumstances, are those who give help and aid to those in need, even when we're under fire, even when we're under fire from them. And it doesn't matter if they hate us or despise us or use us or reject us, we stand and give help and give aid and do it in the name of Christ. Going back to Chick-fil-A, I think what they're most known for during that period is there is a big, huge snowstorm blizzard. And people were trapped on the roads, and people got stuck outside, and all these other things. So they just stayed open, invited people in for free food, took sandwiches to people trapped in their cars. They did good. We need to do the same. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you. In all circumstances, we live as Jesus lived and offer our hands to lift up all, regardless if they turn around and bite us. We say, here, let me help you. Oh, thanks. Pow! Okay, let me help you. Okay, thanks. Pow! Okay, you need help again? Here you go. Here you go. Please don't hit me again. Pow! He gets it. He gets it. And Peter asks the Lord, how many times shall I, forgive my brother who sinned against me? 7 times? No. As much as it takes. This is what makes Christianity different, or one of the things that makes Christianity different from every single other religious type group in the world. It doesn't matter how many times we're knocked down. It doesn't matter how many times we are used. Because what do you say? Those who spitefully use you? Oh, I'm not helping them this time. Because every time I do, I know that they're just trying to get more off me. Jesus says, do it anyway. The persecuted are real. Now, we don't see it very often in this country because of the rights and protections that we have. I'm not knocking those, by the way. Those are wonderful things. It's why we can meet here in this place. But we need to recall what it means to truly follow the path that Christ calls us to follow. Because our brothers and sisters in other countries can't do that like we do. And they cannot do it without threat of torture, suffering, and death. Without threat of their businesses being burned to the ground, without threat of them being stolen away in the night. I do not have a reference to truly empathize what our brothers and sisters go through in other places like North Korea or China or Iran. None of us do unless you live there. But if our Christian brothers and sisters can follow Christ as he called them there, then you better believe that we should be able to do it here. Because the reward is great. The reward is better than anything that I could describe. It's better than anything you could imagine. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Let's stand and sing.